Excuse me. My name is Bill Campbell. I was in the Korean War in 1953 to 54. I joined the 3rd Battalion Royal Canadian Regiment, Airborne Regiment, although they weren't used over there. And I was approximately 19 years old when I went over. I joined up in Toronto, took my basic training in Petawawa, that's Northern Ontario, and once you become a private first class, then you qualify to go overseas into a combat zone. But you must have so many months of training, you know, in hand grenades, rifles, brain guns, etc., before they send you. They don't just join up and 3 days later they ship you out. It doesn't work that way. You have to go through this basic training, they call it. It's the same in most armies. There's a basic training period where you experience, you know, you get behind tanks are firing all the time, and I was in infantry, and you follow them, and you go into gullies and dig a slit trench, and you get trained. You never get really enough training, because once you get to the front line, in the actual circumstances, everything changes. And but it does help. Where I had one advantage, not only me, but most guys from, like I'm from the Maritimes, you were never far from the woods. And when I was 15 years old, I bought my first .22, and I lived in the woods, shooting rabbits, stuff like that. And I was also in the Sea Cadets and the Air Cadets, and I learned map reading and how to use a compass, even at that young age, like, you know. So I guess what I'm trying to say is when I went in the Army, I had a lot of advantages that other people didn't have. And I'll give you one example. We went, when I joined up, we went to Petawawa, and I laugh when I say this, but it's, we all got together, the platoon, 32 people, soldiers, and the sergeant said, okay, everybody build a fire. Simple little thing, build a fire, you know. So I go in the woods and I grab all the dead twigs, break them all up, and start my fire. No problem, probably 10 minutes, smoke coming up. And these city slickers, I used to call them, they had green branches with the green leaves on it, and they're trying to light it, you know. So what I'm trying to say is, coming from Nova Scotia, like an area like that where you were more or less brought up in the woods, because my uncles and cousins, they went into the bush, and I'd see them coming home. And yes, you thought they were John Wayne, you know, they all had a shotgun and a bullet belt on. You kind of looked up to them, you know. As soon as you got that age, you did the same thing, you followed suit. So that was a big advantage for me when I went in the Army. Very big advantage. And why I get in, like I say, I was hitchhiking across the country 2 years in a row, 50, 51. The war had broken out in 1950. I think it was June. And I thought about it, you know, but after hitchhiking 2 years, I worked on a ranch in Alberta, for example. Wasn't going anywhere, seeing the country, of course, getting a little bit of an education, but one day we just got fed up and said, look, let's go to Korea. Never heard of Korea before, but we knew it was somewhere in the area of Japan and China, etc. So the call went out, and they got 26,000 volunteers, all volunteers. And like I say, I went the last year of the war, very last year, 1953. And I joined with 2 or 3 guys, and one thing about the Army, it's a very lonely place, you know. You always like to have a buddy, and I was lucky. One guy made the grade, and he came across with me. And because when you're in the Army, even when you're in a platoon, 32 guys, you only make maybe 3 or 4 real close friends. You know, you do a lot of drinking, etc., and stuff like that, you know, when you're on the Army base. But as far as the whole battalion, which is about 1,200 people, you might know a few officers, that's all. And so what I'm trying to say is when you went to Korea, it was good to go with somebody that you knew quite well, like, had something in common. So that was kind of a break for me. And I joined up, and I'll never forget it as I live. Like you see families that hug and kiss all the time, they're real close. But we weren't like that. We were kind of standoffish. And one thing that sticks in my mind, see, when I got older and had children that got my age, they could have been going overseas. But when I went overseas, my mother was standing there, the door was here, and I was saying, I just said goodbye, Mom. And that always bothered me, when I got older. At the time it didn't, it was just normal. We didn't run over and hug, kiss, and cry and all that stuff. But I often wondered how she felt, when I'm walking out that door. That was hard to take later on, not then, but later on. And I said goodbye, and we left. We didn't have cell phones then. Might write her 2 letters a year from Korea. And now I'm astounded by the way people contact each other. It's kind of sickening to me. They walk out the door and they're on a cell phone. Talk to their boyfriend or a girlfriend or somebody. I don't know who the heck it is, or they're texting. So I often wonder what it would be like. I probably wouldn't have texted anything, because I wasn't a phone guy at the time either. So my mother was. She had 5 children. My father died in 1935, so she had 5 kids. You imagine, and it's in the Depression, and we were, very, very poor. I didn't think anybody was any poorer till I went to Korea. And then I seen real poverty. It was just unbelievable. And it was a real eye-opener for me, that there was another world out there, and we were spoiled rotten, just like today even. The Western world is spoiled rotten. There's people that you can't explain it. And so I left, and I went to...
What do you mean they were so poor? Can you explain what you remember, how poor?
Well, we didn't know we're poor. We never seen money. I've never seen it.
You said in Korea.
I remember once I got a nickel.
In Korea you said that.
Oh, Korea was the most outstanding. Actually, it was in Japan where I seen it first. We were stationed in Japan, and we got there, and there was, the officers tried to tell us not to fraternize with the girls, because there was too much VD, etc. And there was lots of it. But one day, I'm at the gate. The gate was locked. There was a guard there, and his mother was coming with her little child, maybe 13, and enticing us to take the child into her home and have sex. You'd have to pay some money, but it wasn't that much. And I've seen that. It kind of gave me a jolt, And that wasn't uncommon. That was a very common thing in Japan. And in Korea, I didn't experience that because I wasn't around the population too much, except once when I was in Busan. I seen literally, like, say, this street here was right down to the beach there. It was just thousands and thousands of people, just walking up and down. That's all it was. And I had a camera with me, and
you had a camera in 1953?
In 53, because Japan was just starting to make cameras and watches cheap. Because Japan had a very bad name then. They've changed, of course, they progressed. But at that time, you could buy a camera, maybe for $2 to $5. So I bought one. I think it cost me $10. And there was me and my buddy were going up the street no, it was Incheon, not Busan. It was Incheon, and he rolled out a stack of tens, and he went like this: "I'll give you $30, $40 for that camera." And he went flip, 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 and it looked like $40 to me, But I was still suspicious because he'd done it so fast. So I took the camera off and I gave it to him. And he gave me the money, and I didn't want to let the camera go. I didn't even look at it yet. So he grabbed the camera, he took off, and sure enough, there was one $10 bill there. The rest was paper. I don't know how he done it yet. It's just amazing. But we got angry, so the next day, and this is hard to believe too, next day, we're on the same street, and I look up, maybe 10 rows of people, and I see him again. He's coming towards us. The guy is. So I said, here he comes. You stand there, and I'll stand here. We'll grab him, So we tried to grab him. We couldn't. He ran up the street and went into an alley. So we ran up the street into an alley. And in that alley was like this, like a semicircle. And every house was a prostitute house. There were girls there, all young girls and everything.
In Korea?
Yeah, this is in Korea, yeah. They were all brothels, a whole bunch of them. But that didn't bother us, and all of a sudden, out of the alley comes this guy with two other guys, and they both had a knife about that long, and they're coming. They're not charging us, but they're walking towards us. And so we backed out of there very diplomatically. We didn't tackle them or nothing, we just took off. And that was my first introduction to people that were, I don't know, you couldn't go any lower. And the word was that a family in Korea at the time, a fairly prosperous family, made about $300 a year. And we used to get our shoes shined by the little kids would be there shining shoes, and we'd give them 50 cents sometimes, and we'd use it quite frequently. So, and they'd do our laundry and everything. But at the time, I didn't realize they were making good money. We thought it was just peanuts, but to them, I guess it must have been manna from heaven, which was unbelievable. So anyway, that was that part of it. And
you went in 1953, right before the armistice was signed in 1953, July 27th.
yes.
How long did you stay in Korea?
How
long did you stay in Korea?
Oh, well, I've been in Korea. See, there was a great big battle on Hill 187. 3rd Battalion, RCR, fought that battle. And I was supposed to go on that draft, but I didn't. I didn't make it because I didn't have enough training. So they had their battle. I think there were more people killed and captured in that battle than all the other battles in Korea on 187. However, they had to get reinforcements because they needed more troops. So they lined you when you're a volunteer to go. They line you up on the parade square, and they ask you say, Bill Campbell, do you want to go to Korea? Volunteer to go to Korea? Left, right, yes, sir. Just like that. In other words, all you had to do is you just stay in line, don't step forward, and you didn't have to go. So everybody that went to Korea had the same question. Do you want to go to Korea? And they all had to say yes or no. I guess a lot said no, but the majority of them said yes, they went. And
well, what did you expect? By 1953, didn't you know that there were many who fought were dying?
Oh yes. Yeah,
but you still wanted, you still said yes?
So yeah, the word was filtered back, hey, Charlie so-and-so was killed on Hill 187, RCR.
Because I would think I wouldn't want to go if, seeing people that I know or people from my country dying in a foreign land.
No, you got to understand Canada, know why. Canada been going to war since the Boer War. They went to World War I, and it was a slaughter. They went to World War II, and it was a slaughter. But all the generations kind of looked up to their fathers and their uncles. Like I had an uncle killed in World War I on December the 25th, 1914, just Christmas time. And it almost killed their parents, they never did get over it. But you got friends on your street that were in World War II. I remember I was sorry I missed the World War II, I was just too young. a lot of guys lied to get there. They were 17 years old. They went. Same with Korea, and which you've seen that thing I gave you about the first night. We landed in Korea, and after that battle, they had to fill up the battalion, and the battalion was way understaffed even to begin with, which is a tragedy, really. I didn't know it at the time, but I know it now that there's supposed to be 120, 25, 30 people in a company. And when I was over there, it was only 70. And then I found out later on, like I'm talking 40 years later, that even those guys that were in that battle, they only had about 75 or 80 people. In other words, they didn't have enough people there. And I don't know whose fault that was, but that's the way it went. But when I went to Korea, we landed in Japan after 21 days on the ship, sailed from Seattle, and landed in Yokohama. Then we went to Kuri, the other side of Japan. Then we got on another ship to take us to the Korea, and we landed at Busan. So when you landed at Busan, then the first thing was the smell. As you would know, the Koreans used human excretion for fertilizer. Well, we never experienced that before, but you could smell that. It wasn't too bad when we got in the front lines because you're way up in the mountains, like, you know. But all the way up in Korea, we're on this train, very narrow train. It was a little bit narrower than ours. Every time the train would stop, it was a steam engine, you know, it had to stop for water. There'd be kids out there with their arms cut off, their leg cut off, begging out the window. And we throw chocolate bars, etc., and stuff like that. And I started saying to myself, what the hell is this, you know? And then again, the same thing happened. At that age, it didn't really mow you down or nothing. You know, you felt sad, but later on, now, you really feel it. You know, because I've got PTSD and everything from a few other incidents like that. And so we went up there, and we went to the front line. That page I gave you, you read that, and that'll tell you every soldier that ever came from Canada, when he went to the front line, that's exactly what happened. We went up there, it was dark, and you see the odd flare, like you hear machine gun fire off to the right. The sergeant said, don't worry about it, that's miles away, because travel sounds very far in those valleys. And the corporal said, okay, guys, over here, he says, find yourself a place to sleep. I said, you gotta be joking, I said. Nobody can sleep here. You know, the fear. And then you realize that, at that moment, you realize you're in a war. You didn't, all the other time, you're laughing and joking, drinking, and having a ball. Like, you know, no matter where you were, you're having a ball. But once you're up there, you had your rifle, and he said, okay, you can go to sleep now. And there's no way you can go to sleep. And if you read that one page, you'll get an impact from that. And basically what it says is, you didn't sleep. But I'm there laying in a hole in the ground, and I hear this whimpering. I can hear this guy, I want my mama. I want my mama. I said, what the hell is that? And it was right over here, like, you know, it was one of us. So I crawl over, and here's this guy. I'll never forget as long as I live. He's curled up like this in a fetal position. And he's saying, I want my mom, and he's bawling, you know. And he was 70, he told me, he says, I'm only 17 years old. So I got the captain, I said, listen, you better get this guy out of here, because he's not supposed to be here anyway. So they shipped him out and sent him back, because he lied about his age. And they didn't check that carefully in those days. And that was my first night in Korea. That was it. And I'm still looking for that guy. I think I found him, but I don't want to tell him, you know what I mean? Because one guy told me he met a guy that they sent him home. He was crying for his mother or something. And he's a good friend of mine, but he doesn't know I know that. And I don't want to tell him, like, you know, it's too embarrassing for him, I guess. Now, I don't even know it's him for sure, but everything fits, you know. And so when you got to the front line, it was nighttime, it was black, and it was extremely dangerous, because the Chinese That's when they used to attack, you know, after dusk. If they didn't attack, they would come up and say, you, and you, and you. You get 5 or 6 guys going on night patrol, which was a big mistake when I think back on it, because a lot of guys got killed on that. And you would get up, blacking up your faces and all that stuff, and when the sun set, you'd walk out into no man's land, try to catch a prisoner, something like that. It's kind of silly. I think they worked about 4 or 5 times in the whole war, you know, and guys were going out, 26 guys patrolled, but the valley out there usually was all paddies, rice paddies, and you were sneaking your way through there, and you could hear the Chinese talking. They'd be somewhere in the hills somewhere, they'd be talking, but they also had patrols out too. They'd have these patrols out there that would ambush you. They'd be waiting. They knew you were going to go out there that night or something. They had their own intelligence, and there'd be a firefight right out there. There'd be maybe a lance corporal and maybe 6 regular soldiers trying to retreat, trying to get back to their lines without going through, because there's minefields all over the place. You only had to walk certain ways. When you step on a mine, you're going to get killed anyway. And a lot of them did. And so there was quite a few casualties in the valleys because of these patrols. But I guess the powers that be felt they had to have the intelligence to know if they were still out there. Because other times now, when the bigger battles, the one that I missed, thank God, they came in by the thousands. And you got to remember, they're coming up the hill, and the Canadians are on top of the hill, shooting down. And they're coming up the hill. And they also had tremendous artillery behind us, our artillery, and even the Americans sometimes. And they had a spotter up there. When those Chinese were coming by the thousands, they'd shoot a few flares up in the air, they'd phone back the coordinates to the artillery, and before you even fired a shot, these shells were coming in. Oh yeah, first of all, the shells come in from the Chinese, and you had to dig down into the ground, and you just hope your name wasn't on one of them. And they would blow the whole, there was no trees up there, it was all shrub, because no trees could grow. Then we'd call in the artillery, and you know, we could see them down there, thousands of Chinese, some of them with no weapons. They'd run, as soon as somebody got shot with a weapon, they'd pick up his weapon and keep coming, like, you know, they're fanatics. But I found out later that when the Chinese first came in to battle, first it was the North Koreans with the Russian tanks and all that stuff. But when the Chinese came in, in those southern provinces of China, they just grabbed everybody that was a farmer's kid, and he was in the army, you know, untrained. You're coming. That's it. It was like slave labor. But they'll never admit that. They call them the People's Chinese Army. But I found out later after reading quite a few articles on it. So these guys would, if they went that way, if they didn't go up the hill, they get shot by their own officers. So they had no choice. They'd come up and try to kill us. And it was a bloodbath, really, because we'd have Bren guns, 30 caliber machine guns, and everybody had a rifle. And we had hand grenades. We'd be throwing hand grenades down. And the one thing about the Chinese, so they had well, it wasn't a bad habit, a good habit of, they tried to get out all of their dead before daylight, you know, they'd take them back. Mm-hmm. And you get up in the morning, you might see the odd guy on the barbed wire with bleeding and bullet holes in him and all that stuff. But that was their method. They just kept, the Chinese would send them in knowing that there's going to be high casualties. So I always felt sorry for the Chinese, because I had one guy in here from China, and he was interviewing me for a newspaper article. And I asked him, I said, by the way, do these Chinese people understand how many innocents were slaughtered because of the people's, you know, their commanders? And he said, well, it's getting better, he said. You know, maybe he was didn't want to say, yeah, I know it, but I tried to tell him, I said, well, you guys got slaughtered. nobody will know how many Chinese got killed. You know, it's got to be over 1 million. You know, you imagine 1 million people just slaughtered. You know, and it was tough. It was especially, see, you had two problems. Well, actually, you had 5 or 6, but 3 good ones was mosquitoes, and the heat in the summer, and the unbelievable cold in the winter. It's come down from Siberia. It's 25 below zero, and you're laying in the ground there like this, you know. And I read an article one time where once the Chinese got really involved and they pushed the Americans back on the east coast of Korea, the one American guy who wrote in this book, he said, we'd go to the Chinese positions and they'd be laying there like this, the Chinese young recruits, you know, they were probably 16 years old, maybe younger. And he said the only way we knew they were alive is we could see their eyes glisten. And sometimes they would pick them up and try to save them. But I guess a lot of them never made it. So anyway, that's the way it was. It was, you know, funny you imagine, 25 below, the Americans are retreating, the Chinese on that side and on this side, once they were surrounded even. But they persevered, and the Marine Corps got a big name for that. They backed up, and they saved the Army. And at that time, MacArthur got fired, I think. But the armistice came, and there was unbelievable euphoria. You know, you're still alive. You're still alive, but you weren't going home for, like in my case, it was over another year, more than a year. I had to stay. So they pulled us back from the front lines. See, they signed an armistice, but see, a lot of people aren't aware of this. The people that signed the armistice, they signed it for 3 months only. Not 3 months only, they signed it, but it had to be ratified 3 months later by higher ups. And they told us that. So we had to move back 1.5 miles from the front lines. The Chinese did the same thing. So 3 months later, we had our positions. We only had 70 men to accompany instead of 120. We're really low. So I said to myself, well, if the war starts again, there's no way I'm getting out of here. So we had to stay there. In the meantime, back across the Imjim River was 5 miles away. On the other side of the Imjim, the Allies, Americans, Canadians, everybody, they were building these huge bunkers in preparation that maybe the war would resume. But you got to understand that we're here, they're back here, millions of Chinese up there, and on what was that? July, August, September, October 27th, the sergeant comes up to me. He says, "You and you." Gave me a Sten gun and a radio on my back, and the 2 other guys. And he said, "Okay, we want you to walk 2 miles out in no man's land, and if you hear anything, you're supposed to radio through." And it was a black night that night, cold. So we walked, and we figured we walked 2 miles. But if the war had to start, this brain gun wasn't going to stop anybody, you know. And midnight came. He said 1 o'clock. Said at 1 o'clock, if you don't see anybody or hear anything, radio in that it's all okay. So 1 o'clock comes, ran the radio, all clear out here. He said, "Okay, guys, come back in." So we come back in again. And like I said, if they had came again, there's nothing we could do. Maybe we fired a few shots and got killed or something. And but anyway, it was a terrifying night, and we got through that. It wasn't too bad, except the winter was coming. Like, you know, the winter. I mean winter. 25 below zero, and so we had to. Instead of living in the ground, we're going to live in tents. They call them marquee tents. You've probably seen them. Sleep about 11 people. And so we're digging in the side of the mountain. You know, I'm only a small man. You know, I couldn't do heavy work, but I was doing it. Trying to dig flatten out a place on the side of a mountain. We put a tent. They had to make a kitchen area. I'll never forget how long as I lived. I'm working just like you see in the movies, those prisoners in Georgia with the balls on them and all that stuff. And the sergeant comes down, marching down. Anybody hear a carpenter? I heard he yelled out. Swear to God, my arm just went up by itself.
God.
Put my arm up. He said, okay, you do it. But I already had worked in a machine shop, and I knew a little bit about blueprints. And that kind of saved me. So he told me, he said, okay, you stop digging now. He said, they had these prefab lumber come in. You know, I guess they're shipped in from Japan or the United States. And they're all sitting there and they had blueprints. He said, okay, you set all that up. And so I was in heaven then, you know, because I wasn't digging, you know, or back-making work. So actually I didn't do bad. I had to lay an area about from that window out to my backyard there and cement it all, you know. I never cemented before in my life. He said, can you do that? I said, yeah, I can do that. So I got the cement and mixed it with the water. We put a square area around it with the wood, and I just filled it up like the Italians did when they first came to Toronto.
Yeah.
You know, they almost built Toronto, the Italians, back in the 50s. And so that worked out that way, so it wasn't bad. But still, you still had to, you know, build it and put the tents up and go on sentry duty every night and 4 hours on, 4 hours off and stuff like that. And there was infiltrators around too. I captured a North Korean or a Chinese prisoner of war. I shouldn't say I captured him. He surrendered. We had an outpost. We're sitting on the outpost, and he told us later. He said he had been there for 2 days, crawling back and forth. I guess he was scared. How was he going to approach us? Like, you know. So one day he just comes out like this, and I wrote a poem about that too. I'll give you that. I'll have to email it to you. Like a Merry Christmas. It was around Christmas time. He comes out like that, and we had our rifles on him, and the poem says it all. You know, the brain was saying, shoot, shoot, shoot. But he had a smile on his face, and you knew he was a prisoner. Not a prisoner, a deserter from the other side. And we didn't shoot, thank God, because I probably wouldn't be here today. We didn't shoot, and he had a smile on his face, and I say that in the poem. It was quite moving. And he comes down, we take him up to the outpost, we call up the captain, they come up, and they take him to the shack that they had there, and we go inside, and help my God, we had a can of peaches about that big, you know, that we had in the kitchen. And we opened that up, you just wouldn't believe it, like he was out there, maybe he was there for a week, who knows. And he started eating that, and the captain said, get away from him, get away from him. I said, why? He said, oh, he's probably full of lice and all that stuff, like, you know, which didn't occur to us. He seemed to be quite jovial. You know, once he got in and got heat and wasn't shot, and got a meal, like, you know. So at the end of that poem, I always say at the end is, Kim, if you read this, Merry Christmas, you know, a long shot, but you never know. The reason I say it's a long shot because I was, you seen that picture of me with the Korean guy in Korea? The two of us together, the color picture. He had a buddy. I got another picture with him, his buddy. So I sent a newspaper guy came. Oh no, I went to a Korean newspaper, showed him the picture, and he said, "Gee, I'll write that story." Because this newspaper is printed in Korea, as well as Canada. So he sent it to Korea, and sure enough, it was a 1 in a billion. I get an email from that guy. He said, "I'm Kim." His name was Kim. And apparently what happened was he didn't see it in it was in the newspaper. His buddy seen it. He said, "Hey, Kim, that looks like you." And he showed it to him, a picture of him with me. And so I made contact when I lost contact with him the last 2 years. So like it's a small world. Now to suggest that that prisoner of war is ever going to receive that thing is really long shot, 1 in a billion. But his life was in our hands, But we were trained, like you see in these movies, you turn around, you see a soldier, and you shoot him right away, which is probably a good thing to do because he might kill you. But it only takes a split second. Same with those cops in the States, when they attack a robber, a black robber, whatever he is, and he's got something in his hand, they got a family, they got to move fast. And we just brought the rifles up like that, and I zeroed right on his head. But something told me no. Might have been a mistake in my life. Maybe 2 more would have popped up and killed us, who knows. But we did the right thing, thank God for that. And anyway, getting back to it, so we built these tents. We built about 5 tents all along. It was we had to make an indent in the mountain and put the tent there. And there was a road coming in and a road coming out. And I built a guardhouse down below, because it was snowing and raining and everything like that, so that helped. And we went through the winter like that. But a strange thing happened in the spring. We were out on maneuvers again. We were laying barbed wire across this field. And I may as well tell you this because it's really gave me a lot of trouble later on, like PTSD. We were laying the wire, and I looked over. There was a little gully there, and I looked over, and there was a little brook, just a trickle of water running down it. And there was it looked like a belt buckle right in the middle of the creek. The water was about that deep, clear though. And I was always curious anyway. I said, I'm going to over take that belt as a souvenir. I could see the buckle, knowing that it's probably a Chinese belt or something, So, big me, they're all laying the wire, and the lieutenant was over there. I grabbed the belt and I pull it up, and up comes a body, all green and slimy, smell he was underwater. He was under the ground, and so I got nauseated a little bit. Then I look, I see another one, so I pull that one up. On the side of the brook, there's a running shoe, just stuck in the sand. I said, "Oh, I'll take that home, souvenir." I pull that, and there's a foot in there. So there's another body, 14 bodies, and most of them had these. You ever seen Chinese troops in maneuvers? They got these. What do you call them? Mortar shells. They're about this big. They're bombs. You push them down the mortar hits at the bottom, and it goes up. Well, they all had those things on their back. So this was a Chinese patrol that got wiped out, probably maybe 8-10 months ago, or a year even. And I never got over that. Well, there was a reason why I never got over that, but maybe I shouldn't tell you. It's too gruesome. And so we're all looking for souvenirs anyway, so me like an idiot, I took a skull. The skull was bleached, cleaned, everything. I took a skull and I'm going to take it home, souvenir. You know, because I had other souvenirs I had bought in Japan and so on, little fresh trinkets and so on. And I took the skull back. So first of all, I got the lieutenant. I said, listen, there's bodies here. There's all kinds of bodies here. So they had a deal, like, you know, you exchange bodies from the north to the south. So I told him, he said, yeah, we look after that. You know, so he gets on the blower, and I guess they scooped them all up and sent them back to North Korea. But I took the skull. And before we left Korea, we were leaving in March. Before I left Korea, you had to lay all your stuff out on the ground, and the officer would inspect it. You know, I had swords, I had all kinds of stuff in our kit bag. But I hid the skull. And he looked, you know, casual look, that's all. He took off. Okay, boys, fill it up. We're shipping out tomorrow or something like that. So I put it all in the kit bag. At the time, it didn't bother me. But when I've got a son and a daughter, when my son got 21 years old, it just hit me right in the head. I said, they exchanged the bodies, but there's some parent in Korea, North Korea, that didn't get the full body. And I try to imagine if that was my kid. And it just broke me down. It just tore me apart. Still does. And I guess that's what you call the horrors of war and the people in it. But it's strange. You come back from Korea, you felt great to be alive. But once you got married, had your own children, and you relate that, say, well, what if that was him over there? And some Korean guy had found it and stole the skull, like, you know. And the strange part of it was I never ever got it. I'm glad I didn't. The kit bag was mislaid, and I never returned to me, like, you know. So all that stuff, if somebody got it, I don't know who it is, but they don't know the story behind it, like, you know. So I guess there was lots of that stuff, not lots, but things like that happened, you know, even worse in the war. And it scarred me for life, you know. It didn't bother me when I got out. I was drinking pretty heavy when I got out, maybe that was why, you know, for a few years. And then I got out of that. I got a half-decent job. I learned a trade in a machine shop. I became a foreman. But my kids were growing. And then one day I was sitting down, and there was my kid there, 18 years old, and it hit me. It just said that could have been him. Some yo-yo picks up the skull and don't return it with the rest of the body. And it's, you know, it's just, you know, maybe I'm too hard on myself, but they probably got the body back, but not all of it, and they probably wouldn't, you know, they got the body anyway, like, you know. But I just wonder who those people were, you know, it's just, that's one of the many things that occur, you know, in a war situation. Because let's face it, you got two groups of people. You got so-called, we used to call them gooks, you know. Every time I think about it, I get sick. They weren't gooks, you know, they were just like us. You know, they had families, but I didn't know it at the time. Just later on when you see one thing about a soldier, especially when he's 19 or 18 or 20, I couldn't figure out why we were like that. And now I found out later. Apparently the frontal lobe in a male doesn't close until you're about 30 years old. So things like that don't bother you, you know, because you're almost, you're not a savage, but you don't feel things like that. And in other words, I guess, if most guys 35 wouldn't go to war, you know, because of that. You know, they just, oh yeah, I'll survive. I'll march up there, I'll kill about 100 and walk away with a medal, you know. It doesn't work that way. But when you're that old, and that explains everything. The brain hasn't processed yet. That's why you do silly things like that. And there was other guys, probably done worse than that. But my experience in Korea was quite unique because I experienced those things. I was in a tent fire just prior to that, in the middle of winter. We were all drinking. And a lot of people don't realize it. We got, every day we got a quarter of a acai beer free. And most guys would save it up till the weekend and drink the whole 7, to get drunk, And we weren't always drunk, don't get me wrong, but one night we all got drunk. And there was 11 of us in the tent. And I remember we had to sleep. Luckily, like I always slept in a sleeping bag with my uniform on and my boots. Some guys would undress and go right down in that. I said, no, because a bunch of Americans, early on in the war, Americans, green recruits, mostly all blacks. At the beginning of the war, the Princess Pats come into this field, and they found, I don't know, I think there was 62 or 24 blacks, no, just their shorts on, all shot, killed. They didn't even put a guard up. They all went in the sleeping bag with no uniforms on, and the Chinese set a trap for them and just come in and slaughtered them. So anyway, this guy, I'm just going to sleep, and I see this one guy staggering down the middle of the aisle with a candle. We all had candles, and we'd put it on a cardboard box or a wooden box, read a little bit and then snuff it out. He went down to I was in this part of the tent, he was right down there. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, bang, bang, I hear 2 shots. I was drunk, but I wasn't that drunk. I heard the 2 shots, and I wake up, and that whole side of the tent was just blazing on fire. So I rolled out. My rifle was always right there. I grabbed the bayonet, sliced the whole place in the side of the tent, and rolled out into the snow. 25 below it was. And I get out there and look around. Nobody's coming out of the tent. Nobody. They're all in there snoring away. So but there was reinforcements coming up the hill from the other tents. They heard the shots too. By the way, it was my buddy who was on guard duty. Good thing he didn't go to sleep, because he seen the flames from down in the bottom of the road. So I rolled back. I get back in the tent. Come on, get out. You got to get out of here. Like, one guy gave me shit. Said, "Oh, leave me alone. Get away, Campbell. You're crazy." And then everybody come in the tent. They dragged them all out. Had a full of sleeping bags. So that was a close call, because a few guys died in a tent fire, because they had very primitive stoves and, like I say, the candles. But that guy got 60 days detention in Seoul, Korea. Mm-hmm. And that was a tough place to do time. He got 60 days, and I'll never forget his name. His name was LaPont, Frenchman. Yeah, he was a nice guy and all that, but he just blew it. He didn't put the candle out. And it burned down, and we had burlap like this. Mm. And it must have caught the burlap and went right over and was right up against the tent. And she went up in flames. So that was a close call there. But looking back on it now, the astonishing thing about the Korean War is the Korean people, because when we left, everything was flattened. There was no civilization to speak of, There was women with kids and bundles on their head. What do you call them? What's the word for it? Carrying that scarf thing on their head. I wrote that story about you in it. And anyway, they children everywhere bawling and crying, and people with one leg and one arm, and you look back, and then all of a sudden, when I seen the first pictures of Seoul on the internet, the modern Seoul, you just couldn't believe it. in 40 or 50 years, whatever it was, that they could build from that rubble to a city more modern than Toronto. All the lights were there, the glitter and everything. You've seen the pictures, I guess, or you've been there. And you feel good about that somehow, as low as they were and downtrodden, because they had internal fights too in South Korea. Communists against the right wing, the left wing, and Sigmund Rhee and all that stuff. It was like a bloodbath. And to see them rise out of there. But the only sad thing that's left is, see, I'm what you call you got to hit them before they hit you. And the biggest mistake that the world has made so far, and I got to blame Obama for this one, is they haven't, or they won't knock out North Korea. Because one of these days, they're going to bomb Seoul, nuclear, or the United States, if they'll stop them. What I would have done, the first time you put a missile on the pad, I'd knock it out. I wouldn't hurt anybody, just blow it out. And the next one and the next one. But now it's gone too far. He's got the missiles with the help of China and every other weird country in the world. And if we don't take him out, see, the West's got a problem. Pearl Harbor is an example. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, which was a good thing in a way, because it stirred up the people. They went in and wiped out Japan. They just wiped them out. They nuked them twice. And that sounds cruel, but it was absolutely necessary, in my opinion, the way I think anyway. Because the enemy is the enemy. And if you got a weapon, you got to use it. So Japan paid the price. They attacked Pearl Harbor. Plus they had this emperor thing, Hirohito. People are so naive, to think that somebody could be divine. It's just like going back to the divine right of kings, for example. Well, I don't believe that. I don't bow to any man or any woman on the face of the earth. None. None. I don't bow to any of them. Not that because they're cruel or nothing, because they're just like me. Like Trump now, he's president. Well, he's still like me. But he might not be like me, because if I was him, I'd push the button. I'd give him ample notice. I'd say, look, you got 10 days to smarten up, or we're going to obliterate you. And it'd be a good thing if he doesn't. If Kim says, no, we're going to continue. It'd be a good thing if he says no, then you push the button. And you obliterate, you wait till those big parades that they have, with the big amphitheater, all the generals there with all the medals, and Kim, that's the day you attack. One missile, boom, they're gone. And all these other countries, see, it sends a message, like Iran, for example, pretty soon they're going to be there, and our only hope there is the Jews, because the Jews got to survive, and I know they got plans to be prepared. They don't want to be wiped out. You know what I mean? But like I'm talking like an extraordinary hawk. But that's what it's going to take. If it doesn't, here's the alternative. He's going to put one on Seoul and destroy, 3-5 million people, plus the city, or he's going to hit Seattle or California or somewhere like that. And then we're going to act. But why wait for a clown like that? And that's what wars have taught me, it's you have to, when you see this thing coming, and the guy says it himself, you have to act while you can, because if you can't, millions on this side are going to die unnecessarily. And it could have been prevented. But then everybody says, oh no, we can't do that. Well, we can do that. And if I ever become president, I will do it. I guarantee you. But anyway, getting back to Korea was a very, very unique experience. And
let's talk about when you came back and what you feel about, that if, in a nutshell, if you want one thing or a couple things that the world, not only Canadians like Sean, but the world, or Koreans like me around the world, would like to know about Canada's unique contributions to this war, what would that be? Because I know I know, you were extremely proactive and instrumental with the Canada's Korea Veterans Association, as well as building the wall. So I know you're very knowledgeable about Canada's contributions.
Yeah. The only thing about Canada is Korea was lucky because the Liberals were in power then, and the Liberals never did like the military. Even today with Justin Trudeau, and his father was the same. His father was kicked out of officer school because he was mixed in with he didn't believe in going to be cannon fodder to fight Hitler. He didn't want to fight Hitler, and he didn't. His son is the same way. He didn't want to bomb ISIS. Okay, he's getting new Air Force planes, and like I put I got a special newsletter that I sent out to certain friends, not everybody. They might shoot me. He doesn't want to bomb ISIS. Now he's getting new aircraft. Mm-hmm. So I'm going.
Who was the prime minister when the Korean War broke out?
It was Mackenzie King, but fortunately, he died a day before day or two or a week before the cabinet made the decision to send troops there, and the leader at the time then was Lester Pearson, and he went to the United Nations and said, yes, we'll contribute. But Mackenzie King wouldn't have, in my opinion. He didn't. They just hate wars. The Liberals got a thing about that. They don't like the military, and the Conservatives, they're okay. They understand. If we don't fight them there, we're going to fight them on our shore. So. But Canada, yes, Canada did well under the circumstances. But see, they were lucky, Koreans. They were lucky that there was thousands and thousands of young guys like myself. Like I lived in a coal mining town and went down from father to the son. But I was 135 pounds when I was 18 years old. And these miners were big guys, real big. They worked 10, 12 hours a day in the pit. And in other words, a lot of people were unemployed, had nowhere to go, we had nowhere to go. And luckily, I was one of the very few that went to high school. Just by chance, with how poverty we were in, I had to buy books. $39 it cost, used books for grade 10. My mother borrowed the money off a grocer. And that kind of saved me. It put me up another level. But we were all out of work, and the call came, yeah, let's go to Korea. Sounds good.
So how does Canadians remember the Korean War? What do you do is there remembrance? What do you do? Hi, I'm so sorry we're recording an interview. It's okay, we'll cut that part off. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the sad part. That's the sad part, the Canadians see. It's right there. You've probably seen this on American. The Forgotten War. This was a forgotten war. So when we come back from the war in Korea, the war had been going for 3 years. And it got headlines, every once in a while they'd say so many killed in Korea and so on, but the public never ever grasped it. They never did. They were tired of World War II, only been over since for 5 years. And we come back, there was the odd little parade, but we were kind of ignored. It didn't bother me that much, but a lot of guys were really hurt. And they organized, that's why you've got the Korean Veterans Association. They organized like that, then they went to the present governments and said, listen, you got to do something. We got to be recognized. So the result of that was Johann Martin, the senator from British Columbia. She passed a bill in the House of Commons, and we got our Korean War Veterans Day, July 27, every year It's a perpetuity. So we got that. We got another medal. We also got more understanding from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Because I had to go there when I had the PTSD. And I was successful. I presented my own case because, I was a union president one time and I knew enough about grievances, etc. And the Veterans Affairs, I'll give you one example. This house here is typical of a house that a veteran would have after working all his life. Well, the Veterans Affairs, they come up with a VIP program. And what they do is they cut your lawn, they clean up your gutters, and they shovel your snow, because we're all in your 80s. And they give you that money, and you have to hire the people to do it, so they treat us really good. But at the beginning, it was forgotten. But we didn't mind because we were looking for a job, working our ass off, trying to raise a family. And it didn't bother you. But when you got a little bit older and wiser, you start saying, hey, there's something wrong here.
I know you put that book together. Can you show this camera and just briefly show what you put together in the book?
Yeah, this here is the Korean War Book of Remembrance. The original exists in Ottawa, but it's a large volume. And what I did was, I took all those names, they were practically unreadable, I had to retype most of them. But the photos of the photos of the Wall of Remembrance, I took those photos. It took me about 2 years to figure out what I was going to do, and it's still in process, by the way. This is more or less a prototype. And on here is the picture of all the plaques. Now these plaques exist in the Commonwealth grave in South Korea, in Busan. So what the Korean veterans did, they raised $300,000 and built the Wall of Remembrance in Brampton. And this is an example of what it looks like. And there's 516 names there, and we paid for all of it. It took us a while. A lot of good men put their brains into it and their brawn, and we were very successful. It is the biggest monument in Canada for the Korean veterans. And we're quite proud of that. It's sacred ground. It's in Brampton, Ontario. And I've got two friends of mine that are on the wall. One lived right on the same street as me. He went overseas 6 months prior to me, and he was killed on Hill 355. And one other friend, maybe 2 or 3 streets over, he was with him at the same time. They both got killed the same night. And that was quite a shock to me because I knew them quite well. I went to school with them. And it kind of hit home then that the dangers were there, And nevertheless, you joined up and took a train across Canada, which I had already hitchhiked across twice. Now I went again down to Seattle, and we got on a Liberty ship and sailed across the Pacific. It took 21 days. Horrible storms. And there was Americans on there from southern Georgia and all that, and it was unbelievable how seasick they would get in those storms. As a matter of fact, even I got sick, and I was born on the ocean. But the seasick was rampant. Some guys, they didn't eat for 5 days. Just couldn't eat because it was too rough. But we made it, and then we had to return, same way, by ship. We left Incheon. I think most of us went to Incheon, sailed to Japan, and then took a ship from Yokohama back to Seattle. And I remember Seattle very vividly because with the Americans, it was a little bit different. There was more Americans in the war than Canadians, obviously. And we parked off off the dock, and in the morning there was thousands and thousands of American citizens with placards saying, "Welcome home, Johnny," etc., etc., and bands playing. And so we all marched off the ship. And the one thing I'll never forget is they had the Red Cross there, and as we marched by, they had a carton of milk. I hadn't had milk in over a year, and some cookies. And that was the greatest gift. You know, I just couldn't believe it, and the taste of it. It was just unreal. You know, after eating sea rations and anything you get your hands on. Because basically we were starved too anyway, but she gave me that little carton of milk and 2 cookies, and I tasted it. It was cold, and it was beautiful. I was on my way, you know. I'll never forget that. It was unbelievable.
Well, Grandpa Bill, as I shared with other grandpas yesterday, I'm here because I want to, on behalf of all the Koreans around the world, as you said, South Korea now, thanks to your contributions, is a very successful, prosperous nation, and we enjoy the freedoms that people living in this free world all get to enjoy, as well as Sean and all of you who defended South Korea, the peninsula, from the threat of communism. So I'm here to say thank you for my life, and literally I wouldn't be sitting here with you if it weren't for you. And I hope that no one, not only Canadians, but Koreans and just people all over the world, would not forget. And I'm hoping that in your lifetime, our lifetime, very soon, that the entire Korean peninsula, both North and South Korea, because as you know, there are many people suffering in North Korea.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, that we would all enjoy this free world. So if you can look right here into the camera and speak to the Korean people, what the message that you want to say as someone who saved us and someone to whom we're grateful to, right here.
Well, to the Korean people, all I can say is one thing. I have never seen such bravery, I guess, I don't know what you would call it, resilience to survive. And we as Canadian veterans, Korean War veterans, did respect and always will respect that resilience that you showed. And to be quite honest with you, I've talked to a lot of veterans. Like Emma said, or Hannah says, we fought against communism. They are of the opinion that they would do it again, even now. You know, I would go back now if necessary. They wouldn't take me, I know that, but that's the way I feel. You know, somebody's got to do it. It's as simple as that. I don't know if it comes from inside you or your life experience or what, but I have no compunction about stopping communism. None whatsoever. And I would do it again. Go back again. That's all I can say. And you're a wonderful people. I see lots of you, your parents have immigrated to Toronto, and I admire the youthfulness and cheerfulness that you experience and show, especially when I go to certain events. And keep your heads up. You've done a marvelous job, and always think of your parents, because they're the ones that suffered the most, and they suffered. And I'm proud that I could serve. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.